the Invisible Soldiers podcast.
Welcome to the Invisible Soldiers podcast. I'm Rebecca.
I'm Corey.
And we're the hosts of the hottest podcast in advertising. This week, we welcome an advertising trailblazer to the pod. He's currently the EVP Head of Impact at Weber-Shandwick, former Chief Creative Officer at Burrell Communications, award-winning creative on multiple levels. Welcome to the pod, Lewis Williams.
Hey, Rebecca and Corey. Nice to hear you.
How you been, man?
I've been okay. You know, just getting through the Chicago winter, feeling good because I heard some chirping of the birds. And, you know, so we're on our way up, man.
How's the gig right now? Is it busy time?
It's busy time. It's a busy time. You know, it's one of those things that you just don't know what every day brings, right? You know, in this whole new social world that we live in. But it's fun. It's fun.
Cool. Well, let's get into it, man. So you are from Macon, Georgia. You came up in the Jim Crow South era. I want to know about what that community was like growing up there.
I'm glad you came out the box with that because I'm very proud to be from the South. I'm very proud to be from Macon, Georgia. When you think about a town of maybe 120,000 people, you know, people to come out of their legends like Little Richard, Otis Redding, Auburn Brothers Band. You know, I mean, those are some classic, you know, legendary musicians to come out of such a small town. But again, yeah, it's Jim Crow, man, you know, Jim Crow. And it was very segregated. The hospital was the colored hospital, you know what I mean? The colored section of the Macon Hospital. I remember vividly colored passengers to the rear of the bus. I remember trailways, you know, colored waiting rooms. Yeah, movie theaters. We only had one movie theater called the Douglas Theater. You couldn't go to the white theaters, and the schools were segregated.
So tell me, how different was the vibe on, say, your side of town, on the segregated side of town, where people were nourishing you, versus when you crossed the railroad tracks and had to go to the other side? Tell me about that difference and how you navigated that.
You know, I tell you, man, it's one thing about segregation. I hate to say there's a good side of it, but what it did is that it brought all Black people together, right? And you know, when you talked about when you went to the other side, you know, we had this thing about in Macon, like when the pavement ends, the colored folks begin. You know what I mean? Because a lot of us lived on dirt roads, right? And the road would actually stop. But to your point, when you crossed the tracks or went to the pavement, you just saw like, wow, it's cleaner. You know, they had things, and you wanted those things. You know, you wanted those nice things for yourself and for your family, for the kids, if you was going to have one, right? So what you saw was like, wow, that life is, put that in quotes, better, seems easier. You know what I mean? And everybody aspires to that. So not that you wanted to be rich, but you wanted, to, you know, some wonderful things, you know. And so it was a constant reminder of what you did not have. And it reminded you, if you wanted those things, you was going to have to work extra hard to get them.
Lewis, I'm so glad that you're here, and thank you so much for sharing that. As a young person in that space, what were the things that were inspiring you, especially in the space of Jim Crow era when there isn't a lot of representation of us? Kind of what was lighting you on fire and keeping you creative and inspired?
Well, that goes back to what I was saying, us. There was such a strong sense of community. Even when you go back, say, those years, and you look at Harlem, you know how Harlem was popping. You know, you go back to Macon, Georgia, and the one street we occupied downtown, and the clubs was there, and the grocery stores was there. It was energetic, it was fun, it was creative. So we kind of had this vacuum that we created to make the best out of nothing. And, you know, at that point, you really didn't know much outside of that. You really didn't know that all these other things, so you didn't miss those things. But, you know, the times we had, the churches we had, the fun at the all Black high schools we had, it was just a fantastic thing, you know, and we loved it. So, you know, it was a good thing. It was a good thing.
Yeah, I love that. And in those years, were you thinking about what you wanted to be when you grew up? Did you know immediately that creative would be a part of your path?
Had no idea. You know, what I did know, you know, my parents were from a small city called Louisville, Georgia, and neither one of them finished grade school. I didn't say high school. I said grade school. I think my father went to the 4th grade and my mother went to the 6th grade.
Wow.
And, you know, so the whole thing again, I talk about segregation and where we were as a people at that time was that you was telling your kids to do better than I did. And all the parents were on a mission to make sure that their kids did something after high school. Get your education, they would say. Get your education. And we were all on a mission. So for me, I just happened to draw. I cannot tell you when I started to draw. I can kind of go back to maybe, I think, the second grade or something. But I just like to doodle and draw. But, you had art class and that was it. But it was nobody there telling you what you could or couldn't be. I do remember in a magazine, they had, can you draw this deer or something like that?
Wow.
Yeah, I remember those.
And I sent it in and the people came by and said, hey, your son has talent. But my mother couldn't afford it. She couldn't afford it. So I just continued to draw. And I said, somebody would ask me what I wanted to be. I said, I wanted to be an architect. Now, I didn't think an architect had any, I didn't know what an architect was. I just thought they drew things. Then I found out that you have to take math and all of that. I go like, no, I'm not an architect. You know what I mean? But what I did was I followed my passion for drawing. And I go back to going to junior high school where it was a biology class. And, you would kind of have to draw like amoebas and things like that, when you do your experiments and stuff. And my science book was like really great. And the teacher was like, oh my God, and show all the other teachers how well I drew all these little specimens, right? And things like that. I just followed my passion. So what I'll say to anybody, when you have a passion, it sort of leads you.
Yeah. I love that. And was advertising anywhere on your radar at that young age?
What? What you say? What? And who?
What is that? Right.
No. Advertising didn't even get on my radar until after I got out of college.
Wow.
Because, long story, I went through and drawing. I went to a local university. Then I went to Kent State University and I studied graphic design. But I didn't know what advertising was because I just was a designer and they didn't teach advertising at a design school. You got to think about Miami Ad School, Corey, where you went to in Portfolio Center. That stuff didn't exist. I think maybe Parkinson's in New York or something. I just happened to get a job at an ad agency out in San Diego as a production artist. That's how I got hired. But it happened to be at an ad agency. That's how I discovered advertising.
How did you find that job?
Well, I was just looking for a job. Any job that, that said, hey, you have experience doing this or doing that, right? So I just was filling out everything and it just happened to get a production assistant job at advertising agency. And I remember working there one night. I went into the chief creative officer's office and looked through his portfolio. And it was like, oh man, this is kind of cool. Not from the design perspective, because I thought I was going to be designing logos and annual reports and things like that, album covers. But then I saw this wonderful marriage between art and copy. It's like, here's this powerful visual and then here's this great set of words and they were working together and they made you feel some kind of way. And I go back and I start thinking about all my design work and all my design work always had a message in it. Then I go, oh my God, I'm an art director.
Wow. So you breezed through this. I want to go back just really quickly, but you went to Kent State.
Yeah.
And we all know Kent State from a very monumental moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you were there, I believe, when that happened, right? When the Kent State shooting happened?
Well, I'm old, Corey, but not that old.
Okay.
It happened, but I will tell you this. I came 5 years after that.
Oh, 5 years. Okay.
So, but Corey, it was very fresh. It was very fresh. And it's very interesting now. You go back now, it's really on the National Register of Historic Places.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was there, the school was like, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. They tried to cover up everything. We would boycott that day, May 4th. We just wouldn't go to class that day. But the university oh, that didn't happen here. And it was so interesting. I could take you there and say, well, a student fell here, a student fell there. Come over here, Corey and Rebecca. Let me show you this bullet hole in the building right here.
Wow.
And it was so interesting. I went back there just like last year and God, there's a museum. that tells you like what was happening in the country, why it happened. It's a beautiful place for every student that died. So it's not like I can tell you, hey, right by that tree, that's where one body. No. It's a beautiful memorial at each location where a student fell.
Wow. So I brought that up because coming from Macon, coming from Kent State, you have a unique perspective. So now you enter advertising and you bring in this lifetime of this perspective. How is this seeping into your work, or is it?
I tell you, it's a lot of things, Corey. We know how challenging, when it comes to the diversity that advertising industry can be.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, when you grow up in the South, you have to learn how to coexist. Because, when you stop by a police officer, you got to know how to navigate that. Because at that time, you know what I mean? With no cell phones, nobody records you what went down. And even if it did, you know what I mean? So what it gave me an opportunity is like how to navigate and how to actually feel comfortable around white people. One of the things that I noticed when I went north is that a lot of the Black people from Cleveland was very uncomfortable around white people.
Yes.
And you think about Driving Miss Daisy, and I always go back to that movie, and if you saw how Morgan Freeman navigated that space, you know what I mean? It's like you're the chauffeur, but at the same time, you're the most respected person in the house. And a quick story, when my mother passed away in Macon, the mayor of Macon spoke at her funeral. And people's like, is that the mayor? Why is the mayor at Nora's funeral? Well, short story was that the mayor wasn't always the mayor. And the mayor married a daughter of the Dunwoody family, who my mother worked for as a maid.
Oh, wow.
And so the story is that when she brought him home in college, she told him, I know my parents are going to love you, but who's going to have to give me the okay is my maid, Miss Nora.
Wow.
And so he never forgot that. So the mayor spoke. So what I'm saying is that we were able to navigate. So I always been comfortable because so often I was the only Black person at an ad agency, especially early on, Corey. I was like the only one, like one. And how do you be this one and still say, keep who you are, right? And that's why I always kind of carried this thing with me to always put something Black in the work I do. I never ran away from it. I always was proud of it. And if I had a way to get it in there some kind of way, I would get it in there. I remember when I was in San Diego and I was the only Black person working there, and the Wiz came in town. I went around to the agent and said, you all need to go see the Wiz. I put together this whole thing. It was about 30 people from the all-white agency. We went to see the Wiz.
Wow. How did they take that?
They loved it. They loved it. I was like, oh, Louis, that was so great. Thank you for, taking us or telling us we should go. And I just, in my head, I was young then. I just said, y'all white people need to go see the Wiz, And I just was this little person, man. But that's just, I've always been that way. It's like, this is a Black thing. It is good. You all need to see it. And they were better people for it. You know what I mean? So I've just always been in me. So as we look at the work we do, right? And even ended up at Burrell and helping the people out and getting into the business, I've just always just carried that with pride.
Oh, that's
I love
cool.
that. I love that. I would love to touch a little bit, I think, because your background is really interesting because you have equal part time in a general market or white agency and equal time in a multicultural agency. And I love how you touched on how you've been able to move through the spaces, especially knowing that you come from the South. I would love to hear about any huge ahas about having to move through those two different spaces, thinking about how we put ourselves in the work. Were there any insights that you drew when you were able to go into a Burrell and you were like, oh, now I can kind of really do what I want to do? Can you talk about what that feels like in both spaces?
Yeah, I mean, because as I talked about, being from the South, I can navigate white people. I'm comfortable. I'm cool with that, right? Now, when I went to Burrell, and Corey, I don't know if you know this, but I was at Burrell early in my career for 4 years. Then I went to DDB in St. Louis. Then I came back to Burrell after coming back from Leo Burnett, right? Well, this is what I learned from Burrell. Understanding my Blackness and how important it was. Now, here's what we do. When we think about culturally, you just grow up and you just take it for granted, right? You don't study why you do something. You don't study why Black women may shout in church. You don't study why the preacher may repeat himself. You don't understand that there's really call and response that's happening in a Black church. You know what I mean? Culturally, you just like, because we always did that. But when you work at a Black agency and you begin to come up with ideas and you have a target and you have a strategy, then you start really analyzing your own culture. And you see like, oh my God, that's why I do that. That's why we do that. That's how we feel about that. That's why we got to hang up about we don't want to get a COVID shot because of what happened in Tuskegee. Oh, we still got those hang-ups. You know what I mean? Then you just like, wow, I wasn't as Black as I knew I was. You know what I mean? It was just so much self-discovery. So that's what Burrell did for me. It was so much self-discovery about who I am, about my culture, you know, how to tap into that from an emotional point of view. And it just made you love it more and protect it too.
Interesting. So you learned it in a Black agency.
I learned it in a Black agency.
How did you apply it when you went over to a general market or a TCM agency?
Oh man, it's like I did my Wiz thing again. You know, I did a lot of things. I did, when I was at Leo Burnett, they would have these interns come in. And of course, all the interns were white. So I taught a class called Putting Soul in the Game. And I would talk to them about just how Black people exist and just the power of Black creativity. And it was so funny that I would give them a test, right? And I would say, I'll have on their Jet, Ebony, and all these other things, say which one is a Black magazine. They didn't know.
We need to bring that class back.
Yeah, it was so fun. I would put down these things, right? That was just obvious, right, to Black people. And I gave them a test. So it's just what I was saying. Okay, here's the young people coming into the business, right? They need to know that this is a really creative field and how Black people have really contributing to this. And don't be afraid to have ideas that come from a Black space. And I also was able to prove my worth through the ideas. I remember one client came in and Leo Burnett, they said they had the African-American effort. And they told Leo Burnett, you all can't do it because you don't have any Black people. And one of the things I would do is always raise my hand to say, you know, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to raise my hand because I'm not many Black people here. And if I do the Black stuff, that's all y'all going to use me for. And I don't want to pigeonhole myself. But here's what I say about being pigeonholed. Pigeons can fly. And I was proud of being Black. And my thing is that I want to work on the Black stuff because you all might screw it up. So when the agency knew I had raised my hand and say anything like that come in, they called me in. So I put on my Black man cape, you know, and I flew down to Orlando and had a conversation with the client and we got the account. And the commercial that I created was based on my family reunion. And it was so great because I got a chance to use my grandmother's name, my mother's name, my sister's name. You know, it was just so great. And I remember at the family reunion, they just felt like they was famous because they heard their name being called and Grandma, that's your name. And, you know, it was just so nice when I got a chance to put my family into a major brand commercial. You know what I mean? And here's this kicker. It tested better in the general market than it did in the African-American market. Now, it tested extremely well in the African-American market, but it tested, the numbers was even better in the general market. And that told the agency something. Oh my God, there might be something here. So what that increased my value at the agency because I had a card that nobody else had. That's when you can make the Black card work for you. Really, it's really life experience. And I tell young people, like, what is about your life that's unique and different that someone else don't have? And so competitively, that can help you stand out.
I love that. I love that. One of the major, obviously, key themes that we have here is being an invisible soldier. And as you've continued to grow in your career, I'd love to hear about anyone in your career or journey that advocated for you in rooms or really was there for you. Anyone that comes to mind?
Well, it can't be one.
Of course, right?
I mean, it can't be one. I remember, I go back, I got to go to my parents and their whole thing. I don't think to this day that they ever understood what I really did. All they know, I finished high school and I did okay. So you got to start there. And I go back to my community. I go back to when my mother passed away, I was going through some of her stuff and she had this church program for the anniversary of New Hope Baptist Church. And I did the drawing of the church for the cover, right? So I had to be probably about 10 years old. It was horrible. It was so bad. It was so bad. But I remember when I did it, how everybody in the church came to me and told me how great it was. Oh, Lord, you keep doing what you're doing, boy. You can really draw. Look at what he did. Sister Emma, oh my God, did he do that? Yes, he did. It was so horrible when I looked at it. But they made me feel that it was the greatest masterpiece they have ever seen. So those people, and then the teachers and the people you meet along the way. You know what I mean? That just sort of, and Tom Burrell. I mean, Tom Burrell really was a big thing to me because in my first few years, I'm looking for work, Corey. And back in that time, Corey, you had TV, print, and radio. That was it.
Mhm.
That was it, man. And I was working at these places, but they were small agencies, so they didn't do television. And I remember interviewing with Tom Burrell, and he said, Louis, what's your weakness? And I said to him, well, Mr. Burrell, he said, call me Tom, because he hated being called Mr. Burrell. He said, but that's that Southern upbringing, right? You always say Mr. I said, I can't do television. And he said to me, that's not a weakness. That's a lack of opportunity. He said, when you come to Burrell, you're going to do TV. And so when I went to Burrell for the very first time, I was there 3 months. I did my very first TV spot. Had no idea what I was really doing, but I was doing TV. And then once, at that time, doing television unlocked so many other things, Corey, because, right, it really, everybody valued that. You hadn't made it till you've done a TV spot. You know what I mean? And that just unlocked so many things for me.
I'm glad you hit on that because I'm always talking to creatives about reps, right? The more reps you get, the breakthrough comes after the reps. So you aren't the same writer that you were at the start that you are after 100 scripts, after 500 scripts, after 1,000 scripts, or the same thing with presenting in front of a client. You're different after 50 client presentations than you were, at 0, right?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like TV was one of those breakthrough moments, but can you give us some of those breakthrough moments, especially as you are going up the ladder all the way to the C-suite? Are there some of those memorable things that happened that really felt like breakthrough moments that kept propelling you upwards?
I remember, when you think about agencies, right, and every agency has a reputation. Even now, saying you work for agency A and you work for agency B. Oh, you work for agency B? And I always have felt like I was working with smaller agencies, right? And I wanted to get to the big time.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember when I got my job at Leo Burnett. And I said, Leo Burnett, I'm in the big time. You know what I mean? It's sort of like you're playing in the G League and you finally get in the NBA or something like that. Or you're in the farm league in baseball. And then you kind of really get to the majors. And that was a really big breakthrough for me. And going to an agency of that size and seeing the caliber of work and the creativity and the level of talent around you, it just changed you. You know what I mean? It just changed you, just philosophy for an agency. And that was really a defining moment for me. It's like I said, okay, now I'm in real advertising,
Mm-hmm.
And then the people you meet there and so on and so forth, because now you're working on major clients, major budgets, and running some really, really great people globally.
When you took that leap to C-suite, can you describe the excitement, but also the angst and the nervousness and the doubt that was in your mind as you move forward?
Corey, I got to be honest with you. I've been, it's sort of in my career, I've always felt like I've been ready for something before I actually got the job. But now that's still not to say that you don't come with a little nervousness or like, what would I do? But I always felt like I was ready for it, and I always felt like I was prepared for it. And that's probably one thing about being Black, because we don't have that bullet that goes quickly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Facts.
They make us stay on that square much longer than they make other people.
You tried, tested, and true by the time you get where you're going, right?
We are tired, trusted. Exactly. They make us sit on that square so long that when we do make that move, you go like, damn. It's about time. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I will say that. But yeah, again, you still want to prove something. You're challenging all of the things that you've learned. You want to say, okay, now the buck stops here. You know what I mean? So you're going to be talked about. You're going to be cursed about. You're going to be said that you don't get it. All the same things that you talked about people, you know, that when you were in a different place. But again, I think that's sort of like when sometimes that's blessing and a curse of being Black, that normally when we get there, we should have been there like years before.
Years before. Speaking of that, one of the things we'd also love to know about you is, as we talk to invisible soldiers, you are in this C-suite role and you are no longer invisible. You are actually quite visible. What are some of the things that you are trying to accomplish at this point in your career, whether it's creative, whether it's a social impact in the agency? What is your mission?
My mission is the same. And what's unfortunate is that I'm fighting the same battles that I fought years ago at different levels. You know, it's sort of like now, you know, the stakes are higher, and I will use my platform, and sometimes I can get things, I can say things and make a difference, but it's still the same fight. It goes from checkers to chess. You know what I mean? Different game. You just, when the chess, you got to think moves ahead. You know, like I said, the stakes are higher, but I'm still on the same mission of representation, helping people out that look like me, making a difference, fighting the stereotypes. And it is very frustrating. It's very frustrating to get to a point and you kind of think that you can sort of like, you know, take a breath, but you find out that you got to have to work even harder, because now you're in a room where people should know better.
Right.
You know what I mean? People should know better. It's like I'm sitting across from the president or CEO. It's like, why do I have to explain this to you? And sometimes it's just sort of, you know, discouraging, because I'm talking to the CEO and I'm saying, why do I have to explain it? You know what I mean? Right? Or anybody, right? And that's what, no matter who you are. And I was just talking to other people that's in the C-suite, and it's the same story, that, you know, we're still fighting the same battle. The stakes are higher, but I think this time you can get heard. You can get heard, and which is nice. And what you hope is that when they hear you, that it results into action. So that you can't control, right? But when you keep beating that drum and you hope that it will lead to action. And every once in a while, you do hear it back. You do get some feedback from a client. You do get some feedback from somebody on the staff where they did hear you. And that's always good to hear. But the game is sort of like goes from chess to checkers.
Wow. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up you and my dad's relationship. It was a really key component of what inspired me to get into advertising. My dad's been gone almost 2 years now, but I was able to grow up seeing Black copywriters. There was a copywriter by the name of Roland Harris who, when I was a little kid, he would carpool to work with my dad. You know, but I used to be around Roland all the time. And I remember at one time we went to pick Roland up and he was late. And I was like, Daddy, is Roland a man or a boy? Because Roland was young. He was super junior and living that junior life, you know. And then there was an art director named Kevin. He had a 300ZX. Like, these are just memories that I have. And then there was you. And then over time, I saw you all get really tight and become best friends. What is the power of having peers, Black peers in the game that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can share your struggles with, that you can grow with over a period of time? Tell me a little bit just about the beauty of that.
You nailed it. Just what you said, you nailed it. And I'm just going to, I'd be remiss to say this, is that your father, John Seaton, was one of the greatest individuals that I've gotten to know and work with. I'm a little choked up whenever I think about it, man. But I learned so much from him, and he taught so many other people. What you get is a sense of pride.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You get this camaraderie, sisterhood or brotherhood, because you all know you got this shared experience of how hard it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you get a chance to sort of like look at each other and support each other and say, we made it. We made it.
Yeah.
And it's just a feeling that you get a chance to look across the room and someone understands what it took to get there. And it's, all the stories could be the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
all
no, it's true.
all the stories are the same, but then you get a chance and you can share those war stories, right? You can share those war stories, and then you can learn from each other because it's coming from a space that's so unique that not many people can tell you about it. And that's one of the things, Corey, I'm glad you brought that up too, is that I tell young folks is that don't forget that there's people that's done this before you.
Yes, we
part.
forget that. We
That
forget
part.
that.
Get that because, because of, I was speaking at a school one day and a young lady told me that her generation, Gen Z, was the most creative generation ever. And I said to her, did you all invent the wheel? Because if you didn't invent the wheel, I think that's one of the greatest generations. You still see it rolling today. But anyway, but it's sort of like, I think technology is giving people a soft sense of, intelligence. But that beauty, when you sit up there and you're proud, and it's like Rebecca, when I look at Aaron, for instance, he's going into the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah, go Aaron Walton.
Yeah. And I've seen him for years, and I sent him a note when I saw it. It's like, hey, man, congratulations. You know what I mean? Because just to see his story and finally see him get his flowers is just great. And so you take it personally. Not only is he getting flowers for himself, but he's getting flowers for all of us.
Yes.
And for the flowers to come, and Corey, Rebecca, hopefully one day y'all will be up there. You know what I mean? So you just get this sense of team. You get this brotherhood and sisterhood, Corey, a sense of pride. And you get mad when somebody messes it up.
We were talking about, I have former colleagues, former classmates, and, I don't hear from these people all the time, but every now and then, maybe it's on my end, maybe it's on their end, but something happens and it's like, we got to check in.
Yeah.
And those check-ins are like 2 hours long, and it's like, it's laughter and there's almost tears, but like at the end of it, we are better and we feel a lot more braver, like moving forward.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. I think maybe one last question for you, Louis. So as we talk about an Aaron Walton, we talk about a Thomas Burrell, we talk about Louis and even Corey, we've got these new shops that are popping up. I hope we get an opportunity to talk to some of these new CEOs of these small multicultural shops who have come through General Market, or maybe they've worked at a Burrell for some years. Any advice you would give to these new leaders as they are taking on the mission of being a new next hot multicultural shop?
I would say, again, study the ones that did it before them. You got to think about Tom Burrell and, all the people, Carol, you think about all these agencies and they did it at a time when you couldn't get a celebrity's name to get you in the door. Because, you got a lot of young shops popping up and the celebrities are behind them, right? And so that gives them some easier access into the marketplace. But don't forget the basics. You know what I mean? It's some really basics there. And, don't forget that it's still about having talent, still about having good people and treating those good people right. You might get in the door, but you got to stay there. And what I loved about people like Tom and that generation, they understood that we were more than an ad agency. We were more than just, we're going to do some stuff that's cool. You understood that a little black boy, a little black girl might be looking at a story or reading a social post or looking at a TikTok feed, and it might make their day. It might say whether or not they're going to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You have responsibility to your people and to your culture.
Yes.
Not just to be cool. Millions of people will see your message. You need to be responsible.
Wow. Louis, this has been amazing. We appreciate you. You were my former boss. Gave me an opportunity. You've given so many Black creatives and even non-Black creatives. I think that part is also overlooked, is the fact that you've been in Black spaces and hired more non-Black creatives than anybody I also know. So we salute you. We give you your flowers and thank you for joining the podcast today. Really appreciate you, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, sir. And thank you, Rebecca, Corey.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody out there who tuned into the Invisible Soldiers podcast. Subscribe today wherever you listen to podcasts. Peace.